lady, you're killing it.
I feel like I'm just like blah, 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 blah.
Like when I think about Colbert, I think about some of the bad interviews he has, and it's just the people who don't talk. This is not an issue. Of course, I know about your father, but who else in your family? Like, how many people in your family were part of the police force?
So my dad is a retired Louisiana State Police officer. He was a captain when he retired, and prior to that, he was a lieutenant, a sergeant. He worked in hazardous materials for a while as well. So those living in the Gulf, he was responsible for helping with a lot of the oil spills and in and offshore. He was also a SWAT team negotiator, and he, I believe, also worked with some parts of Homeland Security. And he trained up at Chautauqua, which is where I believe the CIA trains, and I think that was part of his Homeland Security training. My dad, just to get a physical description in your brain, is about 6'2", I believe, 6'3", and a very fit man for 63. He's probably like 230. I don't know how weight works with men, but he
I will help you out with this. I will say that I think I've met him once or twice, maybe twice, but for sure I met your parents together at one of our shows. And I am a 6'1", like 225-pound black man, somewhat in shape, and your father intimidates me.
My dad loves
you, in a good way.
Hilarious.
In a good way. I find your parents so endearing, so I definitely mean it in a good way. But I would definitely say if I had to ask you out for prom, I would be super nervous.
Fair. He's terrifying. Yeah, like he presents like a very scary person, and then like he's an excellent dad. You know, unknown to many people is that he also really enjoys live theater and plays Marley and the community theater production of A Christmas Carol that my parents are a part of. So like he's like, I'm gonna go negotiate these hostage situations in, you know, the state of Louisiana, and then in the winter time I'm gonna put up my Christmas decorations and go Ebenezer Scrooge from like behind a fireplace. Like, that's my dad. With that in mind, begin the conundrum of unwrapping the past 10 years of police brutality and conscious mainstream media, right? And then figuring out where your dad falls in that. Like, there's a lot about my father that I don't know when it comes to his career. And then on top of that, my godfather is also a police officer. I think he's also state. My like pseudo godfather, who was a sheriff's officer in Louisiana with my dad, who now is a nurse. My like other kind of uncle figure also worked in city police with my dad. Like literally there is a picture like somewhere in my parents' like wedding album of my dad and his groomsmen, who are all police officers, like with their like leisure suits on, because it was the early 80s, and like holding their weapons. Like, sup? My dad had a like chips stash, you know, from like California Highway Patrol, like a little chip stash going on. Like, so then somewhere and like a photo album in our household, there's like an article that's absolutely terrifying that speaks about Angola prison, which is in Louisiana, doing their like first lethal injection after years of not doing death penalty. And like it's backlit with like fog and a line of state troopers, and my dad is one of them, like, you know, and it's like state troopers in front of Angola prison, you know, as so and so is, you know, being lethally injected, like, and then to like do Christmas and like you know, so it is a huge thing to like really think back on all of these different highlights, memory wheels, a montage that I have of like growing up, and where not only my privilege falls in that, but how I was reacting or choosing not to react or choosing to just like shove it down inside, and how I acknowledged it or how I remembered it, versus knowing how it went now, is really kind of a mind fuck in a lot of ways, and something like I talked to my therapist about, you know. So to have this conversation now in 2020 about defunding, and some folks are still talking about reform, and living in a rural part of Oregon, and being in and having the opportunities to try to disarm people when going into that conversation, because they're immediately like, well, if we defund the police, who am I going to call when my house is on fire? Well, you're still going to call the police. You're just not going to call them for these other things, because this is a space for social workers. This is a place for community or grassroots organizers who are trained, or, you know, all of these things that you have to figure out how to get people in the mood of thinking of. But I've always called the cops on, because the cops are my family. How do you start to kind of separate that and the gut instinct to be like, oh, well, this thing, let me just call the police and like see if they'll help me for this, is such a white fucking lady approach to it. But also because that's who I would call, because my dad knew them, or they knew my dad. So there was never a threat around it for two layers. One, I was a white young woman in South Louisiana and had all of those privileges. And then two, when I showed my ID, they knew my last name. So to be standing in Portland, or to be, you know, protesting in rural parts of the state, and then seeing, whether it's local police or state police or even federal police, retaliating against civilians who are peaceful, short circuits me in a way where it's like, that's not how my dad would behave. Like, you're one of the bad guys. And then to stop and be like, could my dad have been one of the bad guys? Then you start really questioning it. Like, are all cops actually bad? Because for years I was on the side of like, not all cops are bad. Like, my dad's one. Like, look at me. Like, my dad's one. Like, there's no way he'd be that guy. And then you're like, I don't understand. Like, maybe he was. So there's no real way to really resolve that without going to the source. And spoiler alert, I have not gone to the source at all, because I think that is not where I'm at in my journey. And hopefully maybe one day I will be able to talk to him openly about it. But this is, for me, not the same as talking to my parents about voting Trump out. This is a very different conversation. This is a man's identity. This is also my father. So it's not I can go up to him and be like, why did you do X, Y, and Z when I was a child? I didn't get a Barbie car, Dad. Now I'm like fucked up for life. Like, that's not as easy to approach as like, hey, Dad, so remember this one time, quick question, like, did you actually kill someone? Like, that's not gonna go over at all. I know he has 2 life-saving awards, so like, we can hope for the best.
Thinking about your father, and you know, like I had a very similar thing with Jennifer when we had our very first conversation. Is that I know her parents. I know her parents quite well. Her mother and I have the same birthday. So every year on June 10th, we're, you know, in each other's DMs, like, happy birthday, twin. Like, being able to separate your parents and some of the beliefs that they grew up with, and some of the ideas that they may have had, can be tough, you know? And the story I like to tell is about my grandmother when she first met Jennifer. My grandmother, growing up, she would always, I had a lot of white friends. I was always in gifted programs. I was always in situations where there were more white people in the room than other minorities. So that's how I saw the world. Like, oh, we're all getting along. My classmates and I, we love each other. My grandmother's always like, I don't know, don't trust them. And I'll always do the, oh, come on, Grandma. Like, they've changed. Like, things are better. And she, don't trust them. And so when she met Jennifer, she was like, "Oh, who's your white friend?" For years, that's how Jennifer was. And Jennifer knew that. Like, I told her, I was like, "Yeah, my girl's going to call you that for a minute." So the moment when I came home and she's like, "Oh, how's Jennifer?" And, "Oh, did she have a baby?" Like, when she was saying the name, and that realization of change is slow, it can happen, but we also have to give our parents and other people that time to realize it too.
Mm-hmm.
And my father having passed away very recently, I'm thinking constantly about his legacy. And when I wrote my words for his to honor his life, I did include some of the kind of negative moments that we had, but I included them in a positive way because it needed that moment. I needed that moment to grow in the way that I needed to grow. So yeah, there were things about my father that will be contrary to the nice words I write about him. Hell, and the thing I wrote, I think one of the first lines is, "My father was an asshole," and I wanted to say at the funeral, but then I realized that people wouldn't get that. People didn't want to hear that. People just wanted to hear the light. But he was a complicated man with light and dark, as all of our parents are. So I think we have to remember that. Like, we can talk about our parents in a way that we still love them, and also say, here are some of the things that they did, and I'm going to use them to learn from them. So I'm really happy to hear about your family's history. I'm happy to think about your dad as the way I met him and the way that I've always admired him. And to also know that, there may have been things that you're not exactly proud of. We don't know that. You haven't had that conversation, but to be open to it. Because at the end of the day, he's did the best he could as a man raising you. And you are an amazing person.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
it's you hit it on the head, and is the process to becoming open to learning that your cop dad could have done the very acts that I am yelling about in the streets is a hard road to even like get to, let alone like go down that path. And so I've spent that time kind of processing all of those different like baby steps to take to even be comfortable saying like, this is a possibility that this happened while I was at school, and to whoever watches or hears this, like if you're on that path, like there is no wrong or right way to do that. But like challenge yourself to kind of sit and think about that, but don't go down the rabbit hole because it's scary. But the openness is real. And as I take that in, as I stood on the streets of Portland, with impending tear gas and rubber bullets coming my way and wondering like, would this have been something my dad participated in? Was not the mind frame to be in while exercising my right. I would like an opportunity somehow to cleverly say like these things about the protests in Portland and about, this kind of self-discovery with my dad are still very new and very raw. So like, what I'm saying? Like, the next part of this conversation is going to be things I've already dealt with, already processed, have full, complete adult thoughts over.
Yeah.
The first half of this was, some real life processing shit. And so however we want to handle that or talk about that, I do think that is important for me to personally acknowledge, and also like for maybe provide some like you were saying, like, this is the conversation we need to have. Like, you don't have to have it right. You don't have to have it perfect. You don't have to have it figured out. Like, so maybe we can tie it in with my process, the intention of my Black Friend Wen, something in that world. Because I'm sure in like 3 months, I'll look back and be like, God, you fucking idiot. What? This is where we're at now, So,
well, I mean, just actually, you can go into that right now because I can hear like that kind of passion that's in your head about it. So just keep talking.
full disclosure on all of this is that when we're talking about Black Lives Matter protest and the Fed protest that took place in Oregon, that's still probably taking place in Oregon, and my relationship with having a father that's a cop and being an activist and in part of all of the layers to the work that I do, but also having family who is the oppressor, so to speak. This is all still very raw and very like moving through my brain and heart and body like constantly. So it's gonna probably be sloppy to explain and maybe a little tangent and not really like meat and potatoes. And also I could change my mind next week and have a far better idea of what the hell I'm talking about. But, you know, I just wanted to lead with that because I think this is the space and you're definitely the friend for me to start to peel back all those layers with and really figure that out. It's a safe space and I'm sure there are many other people going through it. So if my rants and rambles and dumb analogies somehow like help another person kind of navigate this weird conundrum we're finding ourselves in, like, then we did something like good and positive in a COVID filled world. So I just wanted to put that out there. I know so you and I had kind of talked about in the beginning, but it's not going to be the most eloquent spew.
And exactly, like that's fine. I mean, one of the big aims I have with this project, and I constantly say, like, you know, I really want to get the diversity of ideas out there. But, and I'm so grateful that you feel that this is a safe space because that's what I want this to be. I have been the Black friend for a lot of people, so that's where I'm coming in at this. Like, I'm starting to put out there that I have the bandwidth now to be able to handle some of these conversations. But at the same time, this isn't just about one issue. It's not just about being Black. It's also about some of the other things that are going on in the world. So for you to come here and share that in this space and you know, affirm that it is a safe place for you to talk, really, it gives me so much heart and makes me very happy to hear that.
It's like therapy up in here, y'all.
We need it though. We really need it. Like, I'm not gonna go on a rant because we obviously could. I mean, as long as we've been friends, like, we can talk about everything. But especially in the Black community, like, therapy is just so undervalued and not sought out. And then when you think about every other community, not just Black, but then think about queer spaces and everyone needs more therapy. We need to be able to talk more. We really do.
Let's normalize it. That would be great.
I've been reading about one Anthony Sancho who was allegedly intoxicated in public, was taken in by the police, had a very violent on-camera altercation, which he was attacked by the police. He was pinned down by his neck. He was handcuffed to the grate. In the video that I've seen, we see no resistance. We see no calls for the violence that was inflicted upon him. And because you are in that vicinity and because you were a sound engineer with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and you've ostensibly worked with this performer, I really wanted to have you on to get your thoughts and to learn more about what's going on in your hometown.